Okay, one thing I need y'all to do is the book assignment we looked at last class. I had promised to look at the last questions with you, and I just had you go over them on your own. Not that you could not have watched the class videos or something for the ones you needed help on, but I told you that we would have some time today because we didn't need to quiz that until Wednesday. So if you would get out 112 and then glance at the last like 5 or 6 questions and see which of those you need some help with. I'm going to go over all of them quickly, and then I can backtrack and help with details. Just trying to get all this attendance and school business in. So. Okay, so I'm going to go over the last of these questions with you guys, just kind of the general overview. And then if there's part of that that you're not seeing how I got the arithmetic to, or not following where the answers are coming from, then you guys need to speak up, because we do have a quiz on this next class, and unless you were a senior, this will be one of 3 sections on your last big test other than your final exam. But the other 2 sections are on another topic, and it'll seem completely separate, so we don't get to keep practicing this stuff. But as I go over questions that you don't need help with, what I gave to you as a handout this morning to get you some extra practice, because other than you just doing some more book assignment questions, which is never a bad idea, but I went ahead and gave you the exam review. But pages 1, 2, and 3 are things we have not reviewed yet. So you really only need to be worried about questions 21 through 28 on the back. So as I'm going over a book question that you felt comfortable with, you could just try to do one of those, and that way you can have that done in class. And then when the test rolls around, you'll have 1 page of the test review already finished. So that should help you out there too. Bless you. All right, I think the first question that we did not go over together as a group last time was this one. And this was question 33. Just put this out to the side. Okay, so 33 had 3 parts. They wanted you to list out the possible rational zeros, so that's the P over Q list. They wanted you to sketch a graph, so I got that from a calculator. Now, even though we will not allow a calculator on our quiz on Wednesday, we would either make this factorable, like we saw in the worksheet, or we would give you one or more of the x-intercepts. But for you, based on what it said, you just get your quick graph from your calculator. And then all three of the real zeros were nice whole numbers, -2, -1, and 2. And then indirectly, they're hoping that you see that 2, -1, and -2 were all in the possible list. If we had an answer down here that was not in the possible list, then that doesn't make sense. So, unless it was irrational or imaginary. Okay, anything more detailed about 33? You guys remember where this list came from? Okay, because usually students know that, and that seemed to be different for y'all. Okay, next up, 37 was basically the same question type. Big polynomial function, and part A wanted you to give the possible rational zeros. So that's the P over Q list, plus or minus all the factors of the constant over plus or minus all the factors of the leading coefficient. Sketch a graph. This is what it roughly looks like in your calculator. And any x-intercept, like 4, 2, 1, or -1/2. Any x-intercept would be real zeros. And since all of those were pretty easy to steal out of your calculator, that's where my answers for part C came from. Again, without a calculator on your quiz, what we could do is we could either give you the graph, or we could tell you one or two of these, and then you could divide those out to find the other two by hand. But with the calculator, it should have been that simple. Okay, anything detailed about 37 you guys want to ask? Okay, if I'm moving on too quickly, I'll give you a chance at the end too. Okay, and then 41 and 43 were the same question types, and we did one of these together on the worksheet, but these were the ones that you had practiced. So very common theme where they give you one imaginary zero, and you have to know that the other, his conjugate, is also a zero. Imaginary zeros always come in conjugate pairs. And if you don't know that, your answer is going to look real funny. It's going to have eyes in it. You're going to know that something's wrong, but you're not going to feel comfortable with it unless you start off with this. Change each zero into a factor by doing x minus each of those. Multiply this mess together, combine like terms. Multiply these two together, combine like terms. And then that's where we get that answer. Now again, you won't have a calculator to check this on the quiz. But of these three zeros, only one of them was a real number. So if you took the time to graph this in your calculator, this would be the only x-intercept that you see. Imaginary zeros don't show up as x-axis. So if you graphed your answer and you had more x-intercepts, that's how you know something's wrong. If you had x-intercepts different than 1, you would know that that was wrong. You can only see 1. Okay, and then 43 was the same type, but a little bit messier. They gave you 3 zeros. One of them was imaginary, so his conjugate also has to be a 0. Imaginary zeros always come in conjugate pairs. X minus each one gives you the factors. In theory, you can multiply these 4 in any order you want to, but the stuff with the eyes is what you really want to multiply together first, because it gets really messy, but then after you combine like terms, it's a good looking quadratic. Foil these two together, you get another quadratic, and then when you foil those two quadratics together, or distribute those two quadratics together, combine like terms, that's what you should end up with as an answer. So you don't have to know too much to do these questions, but you do have to be careful about your arithmetic. Lots and lots and lots of multiplication there. And if you miss one multiplication, especially with these eyes, then your answer is going to look pretty ugly. And again, you'll probably know that something's off, but finding it is a whole nother story. Okay, so anything, again, I don't mind even working one of these questions from beginning to end if we need to, but 41 and 43, any questions about how to start those, or any of the multiplication, any of that you'd like me to go more in depth on? Okay, then the last two do a great job, well, I'll zoom in out in a second, do a great job of trying to combine a lot of these skills together. And we did do this on your notes, so I would anticipate you having 1 or 2 of these on your quiz. Probably not 5 of them on your quiz because they are pretty time consuming. But this question said find all of the zeros. So 4th degree is how I knew I should have 4 zeros in the end. It only gave me 1 of them, so this is what we could do to you on the quiz and the test eventually. Imaginary zeros always come in conjugate pairs. You can change zeros into factors by doing x minus each of those and distributing your minus. And you don't want to divide out by either one of these because they have these messy i's in there. But if you are to distribute those two, combine like terms, all of this is equal to this. So dividing by x squared minus 2x plus 3 is the same way as dividing out both of those factors. So you cannot do synthetic division there. Synthetic division does not work with quadratics. But because those are factors, you should get a remainder of 0. You should know that you get a remainder of 0. And last period I was making an arithmetic mistake in here, and it took me a minute to find it, but I knew that I had a mistake because factors should always divide into it evenly. But the whole purpose of that was to divide out a quadratic that I knew went into it evenly, so I could see the other quadratic, and then the other quadratic factors as an x minus 3 and an x minus 1, and then the first one equals 0 at 3 and the second one equals 0 at 1. But you kind of have to expose that last quadratic to get the last 2 zeros. So lots of stuff going on in here. You have to know that zeros come in imaginary pairs, or you're basically done conjugate pairs, or you're pretty much done at the beginning. You have to know how to change zeros into factors. You have to understand why you might want to multiply these factors together. You have to understand why you need long division over synthetic division, and then understand why you're doing that so that you can see this other quadratic, so that you can see the other factors, so that you can see the other zeros. That's the only way to find those without a calculator. Now with a calculator you could just graph it and you could just see the x-intercepts, and that would be super quick. And that is perfectly fine when you have a calculator like the ACT, but for what our purposes are, we want to see you pull these things together. Okay, and then the last one, number 60, and then I'll take questions on these last two, is basically the same thing. 4th degree, I knew there was 4 zeros. They gave me 1 of them. It was imaginary, so I knew his conjugate was also a 0. I changed those zeros into factors by doing x minus each of those and distributing the minus. I multiplied those 2 trinomials together, so instead of having 2 messy trinomials, I had 1 not so bad looking quadratic. These things are equal, and so if I divide my 4th degree polynomial by a quadratic that came from factors, I know it's going to divide into it evenly. And so when I divide that, what's highlighted here is really why I am doing this long division. It's exposing this other quadratic, and then again, even if it didn't factor, which it did, even if it didn't factor, we at least have quadratic formula to get the last 2 answers. So, but those are definitely more involved. So for those last 2, 59 or 60, any specific questions or any part of that you want me to erase and show you how it played out? Bless you. Any of that I can help with, I would be happy to, but
How are you simplifying the i's and the square root of 3?
this multiplication.
Mm-hmm.
So I took x times all 3 of these, so x times x times 2, and x times I square root of 3 would be xi square root of 3, so all that's in red. Then I did the same thing with 2, got these 3 terms, that I did in purple. And then I did the same thing with negative I squared of 3 times these three terms, which I did in black. So this would be negative I, or negative xi squared root of 3, negative 2i squared root of 3, and then the one that's a little trickier is this one. Negative times a positive is negative. I times I is I squared, and square root of 3 times square root of 3 is square root of 9, but that reduces to 3. And so then it's like you have a negative times a negative 1 times a 3. So all of this became plus 3. The I squared is not, well, I squared is like negative 1, but so you got to treat these two differently. Here's a negative 1, and here's a second negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 1 times positive 3 comes out to be positive 3. So I don't know, was that your question, or?
Yeah, I just didn't get how to simplify the negative I squared times 3.
Yeah. Probably a good idea to just write it out like I had said. You've got a negative, I squared is negative 1, and then you got a 3. So all of that became plus 3, which combines with the plus 4, and that's where I got a plus 7.
Yeah.
Okay, others from these two? Okay, any other of the book questions that I went through too quickly that you'd like me to work out or ask a specific question about? Okay, if you change your mind, there's plenty of class time. But the two assignments I will collect on Wednesday, unless you turn them in early today, would be 111, which was the worksheet. That is what your quiz will look most like, but your quiz will also have the rational zero test on it, just like it was in the book assignment several times. That's not on that quiz. I'm sorry, that's not on the worksheet. Again, just because usually most people remember that and it doesn't take long to learn, but it just seems like you guys either didn't do it in Algebra 2 or you did it so little that you don't know it, but that will also be on the quiz, just like it was on the book assignment. But I'll take up the worksheet 111 and the book work from last class 112. So you should have both of those things finished. So I would probably turn them into Google Classroom now, so you don't have to worry about it on Wednesday, but I will leave that up to you. Okay, to get in some extra practice, today's handout, if you have not moved on to that, you only need to worry about the back page. The first 3 pages are things that we will review, but we have not reviewed in this class. So if you remember some of it from Algebra 2, that's great. Try some of it, but it's not going to be on Wednesday's quiz. The back page, all of those would be great questions for the quiz. So it would be good to make sure you have that cleared up. So as you work those on the back page of the review, before you put that up for today, make sure that you check your answers online, and if something doesn't look right, then that's where you need to ask and let me help. So I will get out of your way and let you do that.